Really excited about today's session and appreciate Amelia and Chris joining and participating in this. Goal for today is to talk about accelerating digital transformation within retail. This is something that Chris has experience at a ton of different brands helping with. Amelia obviously has done this at Ralph Lauren. And so lots of fun and engaging content for the session. I can introduce myself at the end and just a quick about Radar, but happy to turn it over to Amelia first and then Chris, and we can jump off from there.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kobe. Hi, Amelia Gesser. I'm head of mobile commerce for Ralph Lauren, been at Ralph Lauren for 7 years. We just launched our recent Ralph Lauren app about 1.5 years ago with many help from both Chris and Kobe's team. So we're excited to be here today and talk about our transformation. So I'll pass over to Chris.
Thanks, Amelia. Chris Mason, CEO and co-founder of Branding Brand. We've been around since 2008. We're a leading provider of mobile apps to major retailers and hospitality groups. We've had the privilege, of course, working with Ralph Lauren, but also many other brands such as Burberry, etc. In terms of notable work, we helped Sephora launch their app as well, and worked with groups such as Wayfair and Hilton Hotels historically, all of which provide great learning experiences, and I'm hoping can contribute to today's dialogue.
Awesome. Thank you both. And then for those who I haven't met, my name is Kobe Berman. I'm one of the co-founders and COO of Radar. Just a quick sort of 2-slide version of what we do. We make all the things that are really difficult and challenging with location simple. So things like managing geofencing, managing a store locator, figuring out how to understand when folks are on the way to pick up their items, for buy online, pick up in store. And essentially, you can kind of think about us as an all-in-one solution for location infrastructure that makes that simple for product teams. Work with a lot of amazing brands. Some of these folks we've also partnered with Branding Brand on, and are lucky enough to work with customers also outside of retail, in the restaurant space and in the payment space and the logistics space. So that is a very consolidated version of Radar. I think where I would like to start, Chris, maybe with you first is, you've been working with retailers now for almost 20 years as they've invested in mobile. Would love to just hear about what the past 2-3 years has been like and how that's been different from, the previous 15, and specifically, where you think investment has changed the most.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I'd say that the last 2 or 3 years we have to recognize was about establishing new normals. So where we saw businesses really get a concerted focus was, how are we going to make it a lot easier for the customer to shop where they want, how they want? So the idea of making sure that you had a really great experience for buy online, pick up in store, or that you could actually use a service like Instacart for home delivery, etc., became a really big focus for retailers. But coinciding with that, you then have to have really great app experiences for the customer and as well for the associates, so you could have a flawless experience for that curbside moment, etc. And so that's where we saw a lot of investment and focus. There was more apps launched in the last 2 to 3 years than what we saw historically over the last 5 years. So it was a big jump in terms of the compression of time and investment. That really goes into what I call that operational idea of what they're doing. To go beyond that, on that experience layer side, we also saw the adoption of third-party payment systems and loyalty really take off. So as much as it was buy where they want, it was pay how they want. And the idea of being able to make things as flexible as possible and let people earn alongside with the brand really took a lot of recognition. On the tooling layer, I'd say that we're in the first inning of going headless. And so we still are and have seen a lot of adoption of going headless first through CMS. So say in a nutshell, that's what I'd say the last 2 to 3 years were about.
Yeah, and Amelia, I'd be curious. So I know the mobile app is almost 1.5 years old, almost 2 years old. Chris touched on a few points like the curbside moment, optionality, giving, customers choice, are those things that were top of mind as you developed the app and went through roadmap planning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, when we were looking at our target customer who we really wanted to create an app for, we knew it was our omni-channel customer, right? The customer that is shopping web, store, and hopefully app. We knew that apps had unique functionality that could really unify that experience. So for us, it was similar to what Chris said. Apps are about convenience, incentive, and utility, right? So how do you create an environment where the customer can choose? And it seems effortless and simplified. It's not clunky, it's intuitive, and it doesn't feel like they've got to take these unnecessary steps. It's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And, maybe specifically as, you were both working on the roadmap and thinking about, frictionless experiences that make sense for the Ralph brand. Were there any key priorities, one or two things that needed to be at the forefront that met those needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one was in-store mode. We absolutely wanted to create an environment within the app that didn't feel like intrusive technology. We don't want to add tech for tech's sake. We want it to be a value add to the in-store experience. But at the same time, we also want the customer to know that when you're shopping in store, that information is connected, right? That you're seeing your full end-to-end experience. So for us, a big component was triggering that modified app version when you enter into the store, that's seamlessly bringing up the store inventory, the availability for every product for the when you visit a PDP page, that's bringing up the customer QR check-in code that can be accessed on some of our in-store screens, as well as some of our associate sign-in locations. And again, just creating ease of experience versus adding in tech for tech's sake.
Yeah, I think we talk about in-store modes a lot at Radar. I think one of the things that the Ralph Lauren app does extraordinarily well is it feels like the app is paying attention to you, and it's understanding where you are. We sometimes have conversations with product leads where that intrusive element comes into place. Hey, it feels like maybe we're following you, or is this intrusive? And there's a real fine line between, what's creepy and what's contextual. And I think a lot of it has to do with the content that you deliver based on the data that you're capturing. But I think, you have done a good job sort of finding that balance and making the consumer feel like, hey, if they're going to download the app, they're going to grant these permissions, they're getting something really valuable in return. And that's not always easy to do. Absolutely.
It's the transparency about the value add, right? Why should they give you these permissions? I think, watching opt-ins, tracking opt-ins is a huge measure that we watch weekly, right? And I think we've been pleasantly surprised at our customers' adoption of geolocation tracking. And I think it's because the customer is this omni-channel customer. They understand the ease and convenience of turning these features on because it's been well communicated.
Mm-hmm. Chris, is that something that you think is unique to RL because they do a great job communicating it? Is it something that you're also seeing in conversations with other apps you're strategizing with?
Definitely see it in other areas, but I think, and it's not because RL is here, but the fact is that RL knows their DNA. As a brand, they truly understand their history, and they have rich storytelling they can do and do inside their app. The loyal customer wants that. And so there is something to be said about how important it is to be intentional in treating this channel as a place just for loyal customers, rather than viewing it as, we have a website, let's also have an app. Website's really for the new customer. The app is for those that are looking to engage with you more and really personalizing around them. So you're really nailing it when you're creating that convenience, but also when you're giving them that value add and learning more about the brand and being more immersed with it in every touch point. So it's about store mode as much as away from store mode, where I can learn things about the brand I didn't know before. So every time I'm wearing that product, I get more value.
Yeah, I think one of the things, we sometimes hear is, it makes sense to invest in an app, but, are we really catering to just a certain population of our audience? And, would those customers make a purchase on web already? Are we cannibalizing instead of growing the pie? Like, Amelia, I'm sure that's, a question throughout your career, maybe, you've faced. How have you thought about that? How have you, addressed it? I certainly don't believe it, but
yeah,
inside.
It was absolutely a hot topic when we were launching the app. I think for that reason, when we went in, we actually did come with the intention of really targeting more of this loyal customer and increasing the rate of purchase, right? Creating these moments where we're interacting more frequently that creates an even more valuable customer. What we were surprised by in year one was actually how great of a customer acquisition tool it ended up being. And I think in many ways, we didn't really predict how great the App Store is as an acquisition tool for a completely new, younger customer base that we don't necessarily reach in our existing channels.
Yeah, I think when you launched, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the app was a top 10 shopping app upon launch. I think it stayed there for quite a bit. So, just downloads from being there when people open up iOS and they see it at top of the charts. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and even just the opportunity within the app stores to promote yourself. So there's app events, there's new ad locations, right? There's different places where you wouldn't have that opportunity to message. I think it's a very different tool set than like Google, right? The search is completely different. It's much more on brand terms. And I do think that at some point there is also a customer expectation, especially a younger customer expectation, that you have an app. I think some of the feedback we got was, it took you long enough. Where was it, right? And I think this is, for us, what we found is this was, certainly there is cannibalization. I think anyone that said this or not, isn't accurate. There's obviously cannibalization, but there's immense opportunity there with your ability to personalize, the likelihood that the customer creates an account, signs in, shares information with you that allows you to create this more personalized, optimized experience that then creates this loyal customer.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing it across your customer base that the most loyal customers, by and large, tend to download the app regardless of younger, older shopper?
Yes.
Yeah. Chris, does sort of the app as a customer acquisition tool come up a lot in your engagements? Does that tend to be a big driving force?
It does, depending on the business model the retailer is involved in. Or let's say if it's hospitality, if I'm a hotel chain, there's a lot of people that don't want to wait at that counter, that would like to check in and be able to have more convenience. And then how does that then unfold going forward in their brand relationship? There's also wholesale clubs that really want to be able to use this as a strategy to say, this is a more convenient wholesale club to work with. You don't have to have the big lines on Super Bowl day. You can just express checkout. So there are conveniences and utility that apps bring to the table. I think we saw that, for example, with Wayfair, how they really marketed themselves apart early in furniture by being able to help people understand that this can help you plan your room with an app using new augmented reality capabilities. So I think the strategy shifts all the time, depending on who the retailer is. But I think Chip Berg from Levi's was noting the same thing in his annual report 2 years ago, which was that you're finding all these customers that are they've never seen before that are now inside the app for Levi's.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that you brought up, Amelia definitely touched on it early on, is like just this idea of convenience and where can the app and the digital presence introduce more convenience for the shopper. I guess order ahead is an obvious one. right? But like where are the kind of the non-obvious areas of that journey that, you know, you think an app adds value there and introduces more convenience?
Is that one, you want to take that one, Amelia?
Sure, I can start. I can start.
Yeah.
I think that there's just general, right? Like table stakes, the app has to work well, right? It has to have a logical flow. It's got to be intuitive, follow standard conventions for iOS and Android. I think that is just sort of a base level convenience expectation customers have. It should be fast, should be faster than mobile web.
Mhm.
That is an expectation. I think another piece is just personalization, right? There's a lot of unique opportunities with apps to personalize more so than you can on web, partially because of login rates, partially because of just the nature of a phone and what you're storing on a phone. That essentially creates convenience, right? So a big thing on us is personalizing that experiences, what content we show you, what products we recommend to you, what stores we show to you based off your location. I think you can't undercut personalization as a convenience metric, right? That it's really about creating that unique customer experience.
Yeah, I think, you know, even outside of location, you take something like a message on mobile, a push notification instead of an email. When you get a push notification, it is a more personal, you're actually touching the notification, you know, as opposed, you know, you click into it, it launches an app. This is very different than engaging with an email. And so I think, it's not always easy to get that right. You know, obviously RL has, but those are kind of faster communication channels, also more personal. Chris, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
You know, yeah, I think Amelia really hit something on the head. They're logged in here. And so you can personalize, but there's so many ways to think of personalization. There's the idea of the curation of those rich stories for their customer, their products, but it's also around being able to say to them, it's my orders, my store, my loyalty. So when they're logged in, you're able to do something with this, with a channel you can't do typically for web. I mean, we have to realize that the app is the channel you bring with you. And for many retailers, they say to themselves, look, 80% of our revenue is found with our stores. In the case of some of them, that's only going to increase over time as they keep opening more stores.
Yeah.
So for them, it's about like, I need to understand where they are and really make it so that as they're near the store, I'm personalizing that message. That they're in the store, I'm personalizing that message. You can't do that in any other channel. And it really does provide an assistive call that you just can't find anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the topics I want to make sure we cover in a bit of a pivot from something we've been discussing is just the relationship that staff have with the customer, and how mobile and maybe just digital more broadly can enhance that relationship as opposed to replace it. And, you know, outside of retail, we work with some QSRs, and I think there's a little bit of a fear like robots are going to be making the food and everything is going to move to kiosk. And, you know, for a lot of QSRs, service is part of the on-premise experience. And so, you know, there kind of are two extremes, and technology can help make that service aspect better or can replace it. I guess, you know, how has Ralph Lauren thought about that and navigated adopting technology for staff?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's about a relationship between the teams. So I think there has to be a trust there of we consider our store associates, they're both partially our best advocates. They're also our best funnel of feedback. They are really connected to our app team. We regularly work with them. And I think that was fundamental to this not being a fear of a new tech that is intrusive or going to ruin the customer experience. I mean, at Ralph Lauren, our stores are our world. They are how you invite you into the Ralph Lauren experience. And we needed to show our store team, we needed to prove to them that the app could be an addition to that, right? That it was doing the same sort of thing as an augmentation, not as a replacement, and that they were getting value out of this too. And that it's a different type of customer and sometimes too, right? It's sort of, you get to choose the avenue that works for you. Is this a replacement for every customer that walks in and wants to have that super one-on-one interaction with an associate? Absolutely not. But there's plenty that want to come in, scan a few barcodes and figure out the prices and see if there's availability in a different store on their own.
Yeah.
And that's a different path. It's not hindering that relationship. It's actually just either another channel. And in many cases, like with our QR code, it's expediting and improving that relationship. Instead of you having to type in your full email address, the associate having to try to find you and match it, 2-second scan, we've got you logged into every system in our store, right? That we need you to be logged into. So there's a lot of convenience factors for our store team, but it starts with building a relationship between the app teams and the retail teams.
Yeah, I think one of the important parts too is like optionality. If a customer, prefers to just sort of use the app as a remote control and that's how they want to navigate the store, that's great. They should be encouraged to do that. And if others just want to have a conversation with an associate and not leverage that, that's great too. But having the option to, use the remote control can help. I think also, especially when, location can be really busy, that login experience of, okay, what size are you looking for? Okay, this is the product information right here on the app. Like that's also the convenience and saving time. Because someone's at the bottom of the funnel, they've identified what they want, and now it's just about getting that item as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Anything, Chris, does this come up often?
I
With
definitely,
operations and staff, and it's one of, I think, the tricky things in retail. The operations staff needs, what the product team is pushing, and just making sure there's alignment. I think some companies do this extraordinarily well. Other times, it feels like there can be conflict. Obviously not with RL, but other brands.
to pull it off, you need that team dynamic that Amelia was talking about, that trust has to be established. But like, if we play things to their extreme, I don't think that tech is ever the thing that we should see as the problem. I think tech for the sake of tech is a bad judgment criteria that doesn't focus on the customer first. And I think no tech leads you down to a worse retail path in the years to come as people look to have that optionality. I mean, when you think about it, no one wants to be in line at a Zara during like a major sale event and be like the 15th person and know that someone up front is asking for a refund. Nobody wants to be at a Costco during the day before the Super Bowl in that checkout line. Right. So the ability for tech to kind of alleviate those moments and make it so that those customers that are in front of you at the Zara can just go take the table stakes moments such as check out and just be able to do that easily on their own as much as possible, so that those that need customer support are really working with the people in store, and those deeper questions is where I think technology is going to continue to toe the line of get the table stakes done for so many that want to go down that path, so that we can free up the people that are in store to take the more in-depth questions, whether it's what kind of makeup to wear, skincare questions, or how do I process this refund from online?
Yeah, totally makes sense. On the point of table stakes, I think this ties into one of the topics we were hoping to cover, and that's just around tooling for a mobile app. Obviously there are all these different ingredients. I think some people, when they make an investment in a mobile app, are surprised around, just how many different tools sometimes come together to create a cohesive experience that feels fast and frictionless. Just the underpinning of, what you've seen successful in mobile apps, Amelia, sort of from your perspective, like what is sort of now a year and a half into this launch, like what do you believe are sort of mission critical underpinning tools? And it can be like broad categories, not.
Yeah, I mean, a messaging platform, obviously. I think some sort of geolocation, and the background is all of these need to connect, right? So that's another really critical piece. An analytics platform, both a marketing and just a data analytics platform. CMS tool is really useful as well. Personalization tools, A/B testing tools, that's always a tricky one, but definitely something from our end we're really prioritizing. think those are my.
Did you run into any friction where, like, you know, tools that maybe are purpose built for web that are already in-house, you know, don't always translate over exactly to a mobile format, and, you know, lots of questions around, hey, why do we, you know, we already have this one tool, you know, how did you navigate that? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, some of this we're still navigating, right? I think A/B testing and personalization is a great example. I think that is one thing that is significantly easier to do on web than it is on mobile. And you know, I think that's one where it's a challenge, right? People are comfortable, and web is the big guy, right? They're the big portion of the company. So we've got to figure out where there's right compromises that work for both teams. And there's definitely learning, and again, a lot of relationship building, and just making sure we're communicating with each other and figuring out with these vendors what will work for one and does it work for another. And I think also just, you know, as a good activity, it's this constant review of our existing technology and making sure that we're utilizing all components of it that we can. And are there places where we can either adapt or expand, or, again, to your point, Kobe, like maybe there's things that are on web that we can replace what we've had with app because we now have a preferred vendor, and vice versa.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Chris, you work with customers who are adopting, you know, or investing in mobile sometimes for the first time. You know, how have you navigated that? Do you sort of have recommended like mission critical categories, or do you think about it as like, hey, there's a minimum viable launch product that maybe don't need those, and you can sort of phase into them?
That's a great question. Yeah, sometimes it's a great question because often people start with the channel and then ask the why. And what you need to do is really focus first on the customer. Ask yourself, do you have loyal customers? Do they typically buy over two times a year and have touch points with you 5 times a year? If you're at hitting that bar, you probably should have an app, and you're looking to increase that to 3 to 5 times for purchasing and that many more touch points, 7 to 10. That's what you're really trying to drive for that as a channel. And then you go to pivot to questions like, do you have stores? If you do, this is a channel that now has to complement your store activity. So that brings in a whole different concept of tech, which involves the idea of being able to understand location better, having to have notification systems, being able to do scanning in store, etc. The historical has been that apps have so much more tech that you can't even use for web. So web wouldn't even know about it, and tech teams would have a hard time fully understanding all that need. But with PWA, now there's more of this joint understanding. I think a good example of that's notifications. On the notification side, we now have web notifications finally being adopted by Apple. So we're going to find that the new email, in many ways, for how you interact with brands, is going to be this joint system of notification that spans across app and web in that area for you. And I think what we're seeing when we hear headless is this call to saying, I now have 2 channels. Give me a vendor that works for both these channels, like Amelia's pointing out for A/B testing, et cetera. You have to have those calls internally about what's better for the company in the years to come. Because we know that this is not going to be the end of experiences. There's going to be more to come in store, et cetera, more digital, more places.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I sympathize for is how fast the landscape in just software tooling changes. And, you know, you're looking at, you know, as these new formats pop up, and, you know, things like customer data platforms and routing data, you know, like, and everybody is now building a suite of tools, there's more and more overlap between different providers. And so it's a challenge for, you know, product leaders. I think it's a challenge for finance leaders. Hey, it seems like we have some functionality here that also looks like it's functionality in this new product. And just sort of like sourcing and stitching together all of those tools is like already a full-time job, let alone the roadmap and the shipping and the refining. And so I hope Radar isn't contributing to that problem, but I do sympathize for, you know, customers who are just trying to make sense of the whole landscape. It looked like we had a question from the audience, so I want to make sure we're about 30 minutes in. We can start taking some Q&A. So Jody, I don't know if you want to put it in the chat, or if anybody also wants to come off mute and just introduce themselves, that's also totally cool. We'd love to hear from the group. I'll maybe give it like 5-10 seconds. We can also drop it in the chat if people want to do that. I guess brands, misconceptions. So Jamie's asking if there are any misconceptions about getting an app and making the investment, and maybe kind of like top things that folks misconceive there. Chris, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. We touched on part of this earlier with the idea that the channel cannibalization, how it can be genuinely accretive and actually lead to more. And I think that the investment analysis always has to be done with the right benchmarking, understand how it's worked historically for other companies, finding good consulting firms that whether you're working with a company like myself or others in the space, they can provide you that data and insight to be able to understand where this could be in terms of an ROI. But beyond that, there's definitely also this belief of double the customer touch points, double the cost, double the team internally. And what you find is that you have a shared API services team that's now working across both web and app when doing this right. And you're able to really take that core tech team and really leverage them now across 2 touch points. So that is not the case. Yes, with any new channel, there needs to be new investment and support, but it's not like this idea of a multiplication, each channel equals a doubling of cost. I'd say that those are the 2 major things that we see as a misconception for companies. I'd also say that the lack of belief that this assists stores is the final point. So in the following sense, you want to know how often your loyal customers shop at your store. You have a hard time getting to that data. All you know is when they actually purchase at the store versus when they visit. Here's a channel that enhances the ability for the stores to get metrics. And too often we think of this as only feeding into a digital concept. There's a lot of retailers that the app is solely there, that we work with. The app is solely there for them as a way to get more information on store visits and how they work with their customers, and really can then tweak how they interact with them at a store basis.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, maybe just riffing off that. So, Sandy asked, are there other examples of digital enhancements in physical retail that may not involve the customer having an app? And, is that sort of a position that maybe we don't need to make this investment, or, we can make investments that aren't directly tied to that? I don't know, Amelia, if that's something you've navigated.
I mean, we have one, right? So for us, it's definitely more of a focus on the app side. I think there's obviously integrations into store locators. There's integrations with virtual stores that we've looked at. I should say. There's also a ton of backend systems, right? So you've not a customer-facing app, but more endless aisle style apps with store associates that require a lot of location data. But I would say my side is definitely more focused on the customer-facing app end.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think Chris, one thing you pointed out on, shared API services that is like a really important point to not glance over is you can maintain one store locator, one customer profile, and still have lots of different digital touch points where, that's both pushed out, but also engagement is pushed back in. And so, a purchase in web and a purchase in the store and a purchase through the app are still kind of coming back to that same customer, and making sure like the infrastructure and housekeeping is set up to allow for that. is really critical, because that's also where you can start to measure the pie is getting bigger. And, you know, you're following the customer in a way that's personalized, because no one wants to get, you know, targeted with a campaign that it's like, hey, it looks like you left this in your cart, but you actually went into the store and it, you know, turns out you purchased that and you didn't leave it in the cart, right? Like, kind of feeling like the brand is paying attention. And a lot of that comes with kind of getting that core layer set up first. To the extent we can talk about this, you know, one of the things we had down was like, was there anything that was deprioritized this year? And maybe it's because something else came up, maybe because it wasn't important, you know, Amelia, to the extent you can talk about that. And then Chris would be curious kind of what you're seeing is maybe things people were prioritizing pre-23 that, you know, you're not seeing at the top of the list.
So I think for us, and ours might be more dependent just on where we are as an app, since we're really moving into our year 2. I think for us, it was taking a look at our customer data and seeing really what did the customer want from us, also looking at reviews and feedback, our customer contacts, and focusing on improving and using the tech stack we have versus necessarily like additional investments in year 2. Mm-hmm. I think also I think this is probably more industry-wide, and Chris, maybe you'll agree, but I think there's less of a push for like the flashy or new and more, what is the table stakes? Like, let's build an optimized experience that really works for the customer and makes it an easy, fun, enjoyable journey when you open and enter into an app. So for us, it's less about maybe deprioritizing, but refocusing on really the areas that most optimize that customer journey.
Yeah, I think also one of the, you know, observations we have working with Ralph Lauren is, you know, the decision to launch an app was one that, you know, clearly had gone through tons of diligence. And when you did decide to do it, the decision was, if we are going to do it, we're going to do it right. And so that meant, you know, no shortcuts and, you know, a pretty high bar for an MVP first version. So I also think, you know, you're in a slightly unique position that, like, your tooling is great, knowing your partners and, you know, including sort of the strategy and also development team you have, that you're like in a great position to just sort of refine on that, where I think there's some brands right now where it's in a year of efficiency, it's hard if they don't have that. I don't know if that, Chris, that kind of matches what you see across the board, but at least that's something I think, you know, we've seen.
Yeah, so I would echo that and just kind of add, what I notice is that when the economy, whenever it's doing well, whenever it's flying high, retailers take a stance of saying, now we're competing against the marketing dollars we're spending to create engagement or re-engage the customer. So all of a sudden it's like, do we create a video game? Becomes a priority because maybe that's going to create more engagement. Do we do something that's taking from the headlines of blockchain, et cetera? Let's go ahead and get that going forward. Now, doesn't mean that any of those things are bad ideas, but like Amelia said, they have to be done with a customer-centric focus in a year of efficiency, as you put it. And I'd say that's something that I'd say is on the line that I didn't see last year we have to say it in this webinar. The generative AI thing, of course, is going to become a continued thing where people are trying to understand it. Are we co-piloting here on coding all the way through? Like, how does this affect our efforts for content marketing, analytics? How we're going to, as a company, how are we performing better through these new efficiency tools?
I think that's a good segue, you know, to what the world looks like in 2030, and, you know, how you think digital formats, the technology stack, obviously AI being one of the biggest driving forces, how that's going to start to evolve and what it might look like compared to where it is today. I realize sort of a bit of a sci-fi question, but Chris, maybe I'll start with you there.
I knew 2030. Wow, I would make some hard investments just like Marty McFly saw in Back to the Future. But in all seriousness, I would say that the thing what I like to do always is ask, will this trend continue? Right. And so also it's worth asking like what trends are not what we thought before. So I think that in Scott Galloway and post-corona really hypothesized with this idea of saying like, now we're going to all be shopping at these levels of digital rates and it's just going to continue. But what we saw was actually like a recorrection to the mean of before, of the idea of where people are shopping is more like they were doing pre-pandemic. And so there is a place for stores. And I think it's more about how you're taking digital and introducing the store in a way to really give the customer what they want from a convenience standpoint. So the second part is of a continued trend. I think it's all about getting the orchestration, the connectivity, the things that can be done by assistive technology such as AI to take that work out of the way. The idea of no longer needing to have as much of a focus on having whisperers inside of an organization that somehow can divine things, and really being able to lean on technology to be able to provide more definitives to keep your team moving along is where I think we're going to see correction. I also, just final point is that codeless is going to increasingly be a trend, and I think it's going to define more than anything our space is codeless. Look, 0.4% of the world is are developers. 0.4%. That's 29 million people. And currently, according to Korn Ferry, 1 out of 5 people, and 1 out of 5 of those positions do not get filled. By the year 2030, I think it was estimated 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4, which is 25% of those jobs never getting filled. So that's going to have dramatic impact on your ability to plan, decide, and push a project forward. It will no longer be about budgeting, but can we find the staff? And so in that world, you will naturally move towards more codeless tools.
Yeah. Millie, any predictions on your side?
I mean, similarly, I don't think you can undercut the revolution in AI. I think, to Chris's point, if you look at whether something is a trend or whether has sticking power, when you compare to like the metaverse, right, where we did see sort of a slowdown, and well, certainly there were still things happening there. It's not, I don't think it has the staying power that AI will. I think this truly will change how we work. But do I think it is in 2030, none of us will be here and we're all going to be running through AI robots? Absolutely not. Yeah. It's much more about efficiency, optimization. You think about like all the work we all put into these manual corrections and optimizing copy and optimizing app store titles and bidding. There's a lot of opportunity there where this could be automized in intelligent ways.
Yeah, I think, one of the things when we were talking about in-store experiences and, enriching sort of the staff experience, I feel like, right now we think about a high level of sophistication for an average customer is, I've looked at this item online and, now I'm seeing it when I'm around the web, and, it's helping sort of build a taste profile. I think we are going to get so incredibly accurate with customer preferences and taste profiles. And, as mobile becomes more ubiquitous and you sort of bring that profile with you into the store, like an associate is going to know so much more about you before they have a conversation. And, likelihood that, hey, maybe it was a couple of years ago that you purchased, this shirt and you may be interested, or things of that nature that are just going to make for a richer kind of in-store, in the real world experience. And my hope is that technology is advancing that and not replacing that, because like the store footprint is still everything.
And I think in many ways we see, and Chris, you mentioned this too, it's cyclical, right? Like I think what we'll see is almost just like what we saw right after the pandemic, this big resurgence of the store because we wanted that experiential feel. And I think there's going to be a big push that the expectations of a store experience is going to be tenfold, right? That it's going to feel personalized to you. It's going to feel completely like the brand.
Right.
And it's not just a shopping experience, right? The expectations are going to be very high.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we have time just for one final question. sort of a two-part question. Amelia, I'll maybe start with you. What's been the hardest part about going through a digital transformation at Ralph Lauren, and then also what's been the most rewarding aspect of it?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that the hardest part is just change management, right? I think anytime you're introducing something so big, like a completely new channel, it's a lot of people to make sure are on board. I think a big thing we did is we called them my road shows, where we'd go around and really introduce the app to every different team across Ralph Lauren that you can imagine, and there are quite a few of them. And the goal of that was to make everyone feel invested, that this is our company's app, right? We are all part of this, and we want all of your feedback. So I think that was a challenge, but in many ways it turned into the highlight, which is, building something long lasting for a company, especially a company like Ralph Lauren that's been around for 50 plus years, is incredible, right? To be a part of something and building something new. And I think any digital transformation project that you work on, the satisfaction upon that launch, and once you see it working and you see that customer appreciating the product and you see your coworkers and your team appreciating the project, there's nothing quite like that feeling.
Really well said. Chris, any final words before we wrap up?
No, I think Amelia nailed it. And it got me fired up just hearing that. It's those loyal customers, just seeing those 5-star reviews and knowing that there's millions of happier people because of this experience. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, there sort of is no better feeling when, especially a project like this that took many, many months and so many different people, just the amount of work. And then when the outcome is exceptional, it's the highest of highs. So appreciate you both joining this, and for all the folks who are able to dial in, appreciate you giving us 45 minutes of your day, and looking forward to talking to everybody soon.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.